Okay, so we're looking at costs of college today. So we'll jump right in here. Okay, so nationwide, this is simple graphic of the average cost for various levels of schools and colleges and universities nationwide. So it's not super helpful with the two-year college because our local one is completely free. The SBCC promise, I should say not completely free. There's usually a couple fees that students have to pay, so it amounts to maybe 50 bucks a semester for our local students. But outside of Santa Barbara City College, if you were to go down to Ventura CC or up to Allen Hancock and Santa Maria, then you're looking at about an average of around 3,400 a year or so. So still very, very affordable. Public four-year colleges for in-state students usually amounts to about 10,000. Again, this is an average nationwide. And then public four-year colleges, so for out of state. So if our local California students, Santa Barbara High School, Santa Barbara students go out of state to Oregon or to Arizona, you're generally looking at around a $10,000 to $15,000 increase in out of state tuition. And then if you're coming from internationally, then there's another bump on top of that. So yeah, it can get very expensive if you're an international student. Then public four-year colleges, we should all know by now that it does not matter what state you come from or go to, the tuition and costs are the same. So there is no benefit to coming from California, going to a private school in Oregon or Washington. It's the same price. Okay, so here's a couple examples for you of some popular schools that our students like to apply to. So total cost of attendance if you are living on campus. In-state, I have that in-state column for those public schools, and then all of the private schools there are, I put them in the in-state column, but as we just mentioned earlier, it does not matter what state you're going to, coming from, it's the same cost. And again, generally it's somewhere in the neighborhood of a 10 to 15,000 increase in out-of-state tuition. It depends on the school. It can be a pretty big range, or it can be a somewhat smaller range for that out-of-state tuition. And then what I did not include in this presentation, but there's quite a few colleges that participate in what's called the Western Undergrad Exchange Program. So it's most public four-year schools west of the Rocky Mountains, including the Rocky Mountain states, that really want California students. So oftentimes they're willing to give you a pretty sizable discount in out-of-state tuition to come to their school. The downside is that the most popular out-of-state public schools like University of Oregon, University of Washington, Arizona State, they don't participate in the WUI program because they already get so many of our California students. But that can be something that could be an added draw to look out of state and look out of state at public colleges, because it could end up being the same cost as a UC with no impaction problems. So that's something to think about. Okay, so looking at that giant term of cost of attendance, that includes everything that's going to that you're going to pay for 1 year of college. So sometimes when you are searching through colleges and you see, oh, this school only costs this much, oftentimes they're just showing you the tuition. So you have to specifically look for the term cost of attendance and the overall cost of attendance for 1 year of school at that university. So just keep in mind, that does not mean tuition. It's not equal to tuition. Tuition is just one piece of the cost of attendance. So in most cases, cost of attendance includes that tuition, either in-state or out-of-state, that tuition, housing, meals, transportation, and transportation could mean flying home 3 times a year. at Thanksgiving, at winter holidays, spring break, that kind of thing. Or it could simply mean you're taking a car to campus and you have to pay for a parking pass. That's all wrapped into the same thing of transportation. Then books, supplies, that's things like if you're taking an art class, you have to buy an easel, you have to buy paints, things like that. That would be supplies. Even even as simple as Scantrons and Blue Books to write your midterm and final exam essays. That goes into supplies. Personal expenses, that could be your weekly Saturday night pizza. That would be, oh, I ran out of toilet paper. I got to go to the store and get toilet paper. That's personal expenses. So that's the overall cost of attendance. And you have to factor in all those pieces to come up with, this is what it's going to cost me for 1 year of college. Okay, so I showed you all this slide last time. What is financial need? You're basically taking your cost of attendance, the entire big number of that college, subtracting how much your family can afford to pay for that college, and that equals your financial need. So that's a really important calculation to make. And just make sure you are going onto each of these schools' net price calculators and trying to determine roughly how much it's going to cost you per year. Okay, direct and indirect costs. So I have a nice little spreadsheet I share with students and families as we get closer to the end of senior year when we're looking at and comparing financial aid award letters. Because you really need to know the differences between direct costs and indirect costs within the overall cost of attendance. So direct costs are pretty much just two things: tuition and room and board. Fees, those are things like ASB, Associate Student Body. Usually fees are a couple $100 for an entire year. So it's usually not too much, and it's usually wrapped into the tuition costs. But there are some schools that completely break them out and are very transparent about what they're charging you. I really like that personally. So those are the direct costs: the tuition and fees, and then room and board. So board would be your meals, your meal plan. And then indirect costs, those would be your books and supplies, your transportation, personal expenses, and health insurance. I'll talk about health insurance in a minute here. But your indirect costs can oftentimes be much more flexible depending on what you are willing to do for books and supplies. So books, are you willing to go on Amazon, find the cheapest book possible? Are you willing to go just borrow books? Or do you want to buy a brand new book for each class? So that can be a very large range in how much that's going to cost. Transportation, same kind of thing. Are you going off to that four-year school and never coming home? Hopefully not. But that you can drastically decrease your transportation costs if you do something like that. Personal expenses, you can eat super cheap. You can go to Albertsons and buy a bunch of ramen and use that as extra supplemental food. And you can always use the campus restrooms and never have to go to a store and buy extra toilet paper. I have a funny story of one of my really awesome friends in high school. He went to UC Santa Cruz. This was 20 something years ago. And he decided after freshman year that it cost way too much to live in an apartment or live in a dorm. So guess what? In Santa Cruz, they have a tree community where they have 50, 100 students that, honest to goodness, live in trees. And he built himself a little tree house, and he went and showered and on campus and things like that. But he saved himself close to $15,000 that year for not paying housing. I'm not suggesting any of you do that, but that's an example. Okay, so health insurance. So most colleges require either proof of health insurance, or if you don't have proof of health insurance, they will make you sign up for their health insurance. So that's why there's a little asterisk there. Okay, so let's look at some actual examples of schools that our kids apply to and really dive into this. So actually, let's go back. So I'm going to look at UC Santa Cruz. one of the UC system schools, I'm going to look at the Cal State San Luis Obispo, Cal Poly. I'm going to look at Chapman University, private school down in the city of Orange in Los Angeles. And I'm going to look at probably the most applied to out-of-state school, University of Oregon. Okay, so here's a side-by-side comparison, direct costs of these schools. And these are actual numbers for the class of 2021. So all of you heading into school, these are going to be some of your actual numbers. So tuition and fees at UC Santa Cruz, $13,989. Cal Poly, just under $10,000. Chapman, hefty price of $57,000 for tuition and fees. And then University of Oregon, that out-of-state school, $39,000. So if you compare the University of Oregon tuition and fees with the UC Santa Cruz, that's that 15,000 or so that I'm talking about difference between an in-state school and an out-of-state school. Then room and board, generally that's going to be pretty similar across the board. In most cases, it does go up in certain areas that have a higher cost of living. So places like Oregon doesn't cost as much to live up there. So generally the cost of living is a little lower, and that will bring down the cost of room and board. Okay, so that's an example of our tuition and fees and our room and board, so the direct costs at those four-year schools. All right, oops. Let's look at indirect costs. Again, these are the ones that can be much more flexible, and depending on what you're willing to go with and without. So books and supplies, this is where I see the biggest range normally in schools that are quarter systems or semester systems. The odd thing with this one is that, having said that, looking at this, UC Santa Cruz is your quarter system school, and then Cal Poly SLO is your semester system. So why is there such a drastic example there of the books and supplies? So I pulled this directly off their websites, and I was kind of scratching my head looking at that. Why that's so much more expensive. That is actually pretty surprising to me. That's something, honestly, I would ask. I would ask Cal Poly and say, why are your books so much more expensive? But again, all these direct costs are estimated costs that the schools put on their website for you as parents, as students, to plan for this amount. Again, this can be super flexible, but they put these numbers on here. They have an algorithm that determines what number should we average and put down on our website to show students it's going to cost you this much on average for books and supplies. So keep that in mind, that all of these are flexible. Transportation, that again, super flexible, but these are all numbers that these colleges have decided on and put on their websites. So I've had students, again, not fly home, not take the bus home, not bring their car, and the transportation cost is super cheap. So think about personal expenses. This is probably the one that I see the most consistency across the board between universities. I don't know if they all talk or what, but it's usually all within a couple $100. There's about a $450 range within this category here. But this is usually where I see the most consistency comparing students' financial aid award letters. And then health insurance, I put this one on here as an example because UC Santa Cruz specifically calls this out. So if you don't have your own health insurance, it's going to cost you $3,100 for the year for UC Santa Cruz's health insurance. Or again, you can provide proof of your own health insurance. So then you see the totals for the indirect costs. And so you add that to your cost of attendance for the tuition fees and room and board, and that gets you your overall cost of attendance. So these are just some examples to go through with you. Again, I try working with a lot of students in the spring. Once you get your acceptances and your financial aid award letters, we start to plug these numbers in to see how much it's actually going to cost you to attend these schools. So looking at those direct costs and those indirect costs, then I add a few rows down here for what types of aid are you receiving. So the financial aid package that you get upon acceptance will oftentimes have all of these or maybe just some of these in your financial aid award letter. So they'll call out college or university grants and scholarships. These could be, these are most of the time merit aid scholarships that they're going to show you, but there might be some institution-specific need-based aid that they show you too, that you've earned. Then work study, if you're eligible, it'll list it on there. Federal and direct student loans, which the student loan interest rate right now is pretty much the lowest ever, 2.75, which is crazy ridiculously low, which is awesome. Not saying take a loan, but if you have to this year, that's a really, really low interest rate. Parent Plus loan, this is also a very low interest rate. Normally, when we're looking at student loans, so like last year's students, they were looking at about closer to 4% for the student loans, and then closer to 6.5% for the parent loans. So these are the price now. Again, they're constantly shifting, but I would expect pretty much throughout most of this year, those interest rates are going to stay low like that. And then this will not be on your award letter, but other like outside private scholarships, that will not be on your award letter. But I put that in here so that students make sure that you factor in any private scholarships that you are earning. So Santa Barbara Scholarship Foundation, Santa Barbara High School Alumni Association, you have to factor those in so that you can know how much it's going to cost you for the year. Okay, so as you're going through all of this, cost of attendance and financial aid, there's a few simple formulas you need to know. They're really simple. Direct costs plus indirect costs, that equals your cost of attendance. So it's not just that tuition and room and board, it's all those indirect costs too. Then your financial need is you take your overall cost of attendance of that university and subtract what your family could afford, which is your EFC, equals your financial need. And then you have your cost of attendance, and then subtract what you've received in financial aid, and then that equals the remaining amount owed for that school. So you see just a grid right here. I just did a screenshot of my spreadsheet and put that in here. That's my very bottom, and I total everything out to see how much that number is going to be. And hopefully that number is going to be as close to zero as possible. That's the goal, right? That's the hope. Okay, let's talk another minute here about timelines. So as we are entering senior year, or if you're a junior planning on entering senior year in another year, we're looking at financial aid. The thing that really kicks it off is beginning in October. That's when the FAFSA and that's when the DREAM Act open up. So be completing those. You don't have to right on October 1st, but do so in October, November, because it does provide a benefit to those four-year schools. If they already have your financial information, they can award you the most possible financial aid. So complete those early on. And then also in October and earlier, if you can, go on to each university net price calculator. And you have to do this on each individual college because they're different. So go to each individual college and do their net price calculator. Oftentimes it's very helpful if you have your EFC number, which is, again, expected family contribution, which you'll get from the FAFSA. So it's really helpful to have that number, but you can plug that information in to give you a ballpark of what it's going to possibly cost you. Then as we look into November to February, that's when you're doing all your submissions of your college applications. That's also when you would apply to the CSS profile if needed. So again, what I mentioned last time, That is not required by, actually most universities don't require this, but a lot of the higher end selective private schools do. So you would complete that. That has various deadlines per college. So pay attention to those deadlines and complete that CSS profile if needed. Then January to March is pretty much just wait and wait and wait, and hopefully be receiving college applications, and then also be receiving your financial aid award letters. Colleges have until April 1st to tell you well, first of all, of acceptance, and then also of what kind of aid they are providing for you. Now, there's a couple of caveats to this, because there are some colleges that actually have deadlines after April 1st. So that's pretty much on a rolling basis. So you apply, hopefully you get accepted, and you get your financial aid award letter at the time of acceptance. There are some colleges that will say, congratulations, you're accepted. And then you have to wait 2 months to see your financial aid award letter. So sometimes they come together and sometimes they don't. And then throughout all of senior year, be looking at and applying to private scholarships out there, both merit aid and need-based scholarships. Okay, so some resources for you. Always our College and Career Center website. I have this spreadsheet I was talking about on our website, so cost of college estimator, and you can plug in actual numbers or fake numbers and just play around with it. Santa Barbara Scholarship Foundation, fantastic at advising for financial aid, but also a place you can apply to scholarships. CalSOAP, also really good at advising for financial aid. The individual college financial aid offices. This is where parents, you can call the financial aid office every day, any day. No problem. That's basically the only office you can call on college campuses. It's all up to your student. But financial aid, you can call. And then the net price calculator. Again, go to each individual college and their financial aid web pages and do the net price calculator. Okay, this and all other videos on our YouTube channel. So please check that out. As we get into this school year, we will be filming, this is where it gets a little interesting, but we will be filming videos that will be lessons for your students. That will be, some will be optional, some will be required, where we will actually go into classes through Zoom and be presenting. So it's going to be a little interesting, but all of those videos will be for parents and for students on our YouTube channel. And just a reminder, we only have a couple more weeks, so if you think of ways that I can support you as we are going into this crazy fall and crazy year potentially, please let me know. Here's some ideas I have, but please let me know if there's other ways that I can help.